Hi, everyone. I am so excited to share this Alexander Studies Online blog with Michelle Capalbo. I am Gabi Minas-Brandes. I've been teaching Alexander technique for a very long time. I'm in Vancouver. I work with many musicians and singers, and I'm very interested in research and particularly working with musicians. I think there's a very interesting connection between Alexander technique and music making. It's Michelle. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Michelle Capelbo, and I have been an opera singer for over 20 years, so a couple of decades on the stage all over the world in primary roles. My specialty is Puccini and Verdi, and my background in Alexander technique, I came later. I started to teach more voice, and I really wanted to expand my teaching palette, my knowledge, my vocabulary, my experiences beyond what I had merely been taught. Because although I believed I knew how to sing, that belief may have shifted, by the way, but I believed that I knew how to do what I was doing and I was having some success. But I didn't necessarily believe that that would translate to everyone. So I went and I studied in New York. I'm originally a Canadian too, by the way. Hello, Canada. But I live outside of New York. So I graduated from the Diamond Institute in 2018, where I studied with Ted Diamond.
Thank you. And what sparked your interest to do this research? I mean, you were a singer and now an Alexander teacher. Why is the next step of doing research?
It really comes from that desire to know more so that I could be an effective and empowering teacher. So I went and I started my master's, and I found a study-based program at the University of Wales Trinity St. David through the Voice. It began as Workshop UK, but Voice Study Center is now what it's known by. And it allowed me all the freedom in the world to study anything I wanted under the umbrella of voice pedagogy. So I really focused on voice pedagogy and the Alexander technique. So I really, for 3 years, studied the integration of the two. How do the two come together? There's not a lot of research out there. So that really made me think, aha, there's a Jones study from 1972, and I met Phyllis Richmond, who tried to expand that into a larger cohort. And she did a study in 1996 that she so generously shared with me. But not a lot has been done, and nothing had been done longitudinally. So we know from one interaction what might be observed, and then that was validated in a secondary study. But that's one interaction. And what is their background? And do they have experience in the technique? And what was their methodology? And there were so many questions that weren't quite answered. And now, through this rigorous process that we look at for research, I thought maybe I can lay down some rules, some research ideas that people may take up, but it really inspired me to say, hey, I want to know more. I want to know what they were seeing. I want to know how I can really define that, given all of the acoustic research that even has come out since 1996 when Phyllis did her study. So it's really been exploding on the voice side. And the AT side is still very novel. So I really wanted to bring that out.
How many participants did you have?
Because it was during COVID, I really wanted a few, but I got one.
You
And
had one student, one singer, and that student got 15 lessons. So what happened? They came and you,
so it was 15 lessons, and I modeled this because the student was completely new to Alexander technique, and that's what I wanted to find.
so a beginner.
Beginner. She's like, yeah, I've heard of it, but I've
Yep.
never been exposed
And
to it.
then what did you do in the 15 sessions?
So it was structured around a 30-minute table turn lesson. And I'm human, but so things change a little bit. But I did sort of create a script for myself where that I would go to the same parts of the body, make sure that the head, the neck, the arms, the knees, the legs, and go kind of around and do relatively the same thing every lesson. Give relatively the same directions. And I kept the directions relatively traditional. It's like allow your neck to be free, to let your head go away, to let your torso lengthen and widen. So it was very, very traditional directions. I didn't give any explicit direction like, hey, I notice that this is happening. You might want to think that way. I didn't teach in a way. I tried to make this more experimental and keep to quite a strict physical and verbal regimens.
And then when did she sing? She got up from the table and sang?
She would sing first. We would have our 30-minute lesson. She would sing again. Yeah, to measure pre and post.
Got it.
Every time.
So for 15 sessions, you had singing, table work, singing, all measured.
Yeah, so we have 30 vocal samples.
And in a nutshell, what did you find?
It's interesting because it's only one participant. And what I found was I validated Joan's research from 50 years ago. There is a boost in that ringing area. Enhancement of the overtones, richness of the overtones, singer formant boost, whatever you want to call it, right in that area, what makes classical singers ring out and be heard over an orchestra, that got a boost. Over time, the volume increased, but that was not immediate. And over time, the body and mind seemed to be learning so that there was a rebound to some sort of new and reliable level in the second phase. From about lessons 9 through 15, there seemed to be a stabilization of the body, even with this really introductory, and she stuck with it. And all we did was table turn, 15 sessions. We worked very slowly. So it's not like I was introducing anything active, which might really bring about, hey, we're going to really use the body now. Even with this simple procedure, there seemed to be a stabilization from lessons 9 through 15.
Fascinating. So if you do this exact research again, would you do anything different? So one singer, 15 lessons.
One singer, I wouldn't because I also measured, and it's not in the abstract because this could be a separate article. I also measured the singer's perception of how they were singing. And I used 2 different questionnaires that have been validated more for pathological vocal conditions. And one was measured at the very, very, very beginning, pre any testing, and then at the very, very, very end after the last intervention, just to get a perception on, hey, how do you think you're improving? That showed that she thought she was improving. I used another one that I assessed every single lesson. So there were 15, and I always assessed after. How I would change is I would give that assessment before and after, because I think I got a sort of a conglomerate response. It's like, well, I'm just not feeling great today, instead of I'm coming in and I feel kind of not warmed up and I'm a little sick. And after the session, it might show a difference. The other thing that might have affected those results is because it was COVID, a lot of people were just not feeling so great about their singing. And her whole level of how she felt about how she sang was a little on the lower end when it came to other normative and test results from other people's research. Women tend to test a little lower. They feel a little less secure. So all of these things come into place. I would try to reassess how the heck I would measure her perception of how she did.
Thank you. What was the time difference between the 15 sessions? Was it once a week, twice a week, every day? How did you do that?
because FM Alexander and even Dr. Barlow recommended intensive training in the beginning, I followed that. So it was 15 sessions within 35 days. It averaged out to be about 3 times a week.
And would you stick with this if you did it again?
Yes, I would. I found that having that reinforcement was really, really helpful, because sometimes when we had a COVID scare and she's like, I can't come in, it made a huge difference to have 5 days in between instead of 2 or 3.
So if an Alexander teacher comes to you and says, Michelle, from your study, what advice do you give me as an Alexander teacher?
Yes.
Do you have any specific, we'll call it Alexander advice or suggestions for Alexander teachers who are not singers, but work with singers and want to achieve that, but may not have the language or the capacity to hear the nuance, but still want to work on that?
There are so many things that you can work on with singers. A lot of them, I mean, Alexander teachers will see it. Be on the lookout for locked legs. Be on the lookout for the really high sternum, because that's going to lock their back. If they're teaching regularly, they're going to see this. Be on the lookout for this. If you're an Alexander teacher and you see this, be flexible on that. And this is why. If they're always doing this, if this is their default, that's not so terrific. However, research has shown that if you do this, you get stretch in the vocal folds, which does help with your higher range. So especially if you're working with something, it doesn't matter the voice, but often baritones will do this and it helps them and it brings a lot of ring into the voice. If they're doing this too early or too often, then just caution, say, hey, sunshine, do you need that right there, right now, so soon, all the time? It's just, can you wait? Can you just hold that? Keep it in your back pocket for when it's really going to help. That's what I would suggest.
Or even consider how to raise the head without shortening the neck, the back of the neck. What does it mean to come up and over?
Yeah, I mean, but if you do see this, it's not necessarily a big no-no in Singerland. But
Or in Alexanderland.
yeah, but the question for me is, can you recover? How are you recovering? Can you come back when you're taking your breath? Can you just come back to yourself for a moment?
Right. So this is Alexander language that teachers can use or things to look at. And you've spoken a little bit from the perspective of a singer, a lot from a perspective of a singer, and some information about the perspective of a researcher. And I really appreciate the way you put this all together, and it's so helpful for our growing bank of information about Alexander technique and its application in this particular case to singing. Is there anything else that we should talk about, look at, that you want to highlight before we end this lovely interview?
I really struggled with the idea of wanting to just sit back and rely on spontaneous shifts and see what that would really, really bring. And it comes back to the point of explicit versus spontaneous results, how to work with anyone, but with singers. For example, gasping when you breathe. This was an interesting finding, and it was a post hoc finding of mine also, because Jones described that there was reduced respiratory noise. So that noisy inhalation was greatly reduced. Interphrase, so that's your quick catch breath. You don't necessarily have the time to do the big, it was the quick catch breath. And he noted that that was reduced, as did Phyllis Richmond. I found the same thing for the first few lessons, and then that benefit went away. I imagine that that is something that's not necessarily stable, but if you said, just bring this to the front of your mind, think, allow yourself to really, and because I didn't give explicit directions, do this, do that, it's just like, we've had our table turn, get up and sing. Those were her instructions. Take a time, pause, get up and sing. What I never said was, okay, you must do this, which would be different research. You must prepare the space with your secret smile, whatever you're about to laugh, whatever you want to use, whatever language works for you. And then allow yourself to breathe in without all the tension and that sort of gasping noise. So it would be interesting to do various little micro studies. Are they micro studies? Little ones, just to see how the explicit language might change that result. My other unexpected finding post hoc was that my singer's intonation was improved or didn't shift at all because it was already pretty close. It improved following intervention. So for whatever reason, I hypothesize that they just gave themselves a moment. They calmed down, and all of a sudden their intonation was like, went right into the pocket so that you couldn't discern the difference between what was slightly under or slightly over. It was in the ballpark. It was great. Whereas before it was just like, oh, had a bad day. I'm sorry. How are you doing? So that was something that was unexpected. There are all these small things that you can notice and measure. And for acoustics, it's like vibrato, intonation, where the voice is ringing, and things like that. How loud is the voice?
Well, what I find fascinating is that you had some external measurements that are, we'll call them objective, and you used yourself as the tool, as the Alexander teacher and singer working with the person that you studied. So it's sort of an interesting combination of qualitative, if you like, you, the researcher, and the singer, Alexander teacher, and external measurements. And I think that that is one of the unique features of your study. And I'm hoping that following this blog, that people will be intrigued to read your study, to read the publications that will come out of that, and to reach out to you if they have any more questions.
People are absolutely welcome to reach out. I just find the singing voice so fascinating, and the effects of the Alexander technique on the singing voice is changeable and fascinating, and how you teach it and how you can change it to meet your student where they are.
Well, I think it's so clear that people use voice, whether it's speaking or singing, acting, to communicate. And we make sound to communicate, and working on what it is that we want to say and how we want to say it is where Alexander technique can really support what we're doing. Michelle, it was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your study, for your patient explanation of it, and for taking the time with Alexander Studies Online. And take care.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks everyone for sticking with us.